Step back now." That's what the officer barked at her. Not because she was armed, not because she posed a threat, but because she was black and the dog barked. That was it. One bark, one glance, and suddenly she was surrounded like a criminal. No one asked if she was okay. No one cared that she was pregnant. All they saw was her skin and the dog's reaction, and that was enough to strip her of dignity in the middle of an airport. Her ID was questioned, her bag ripped open, her belly ignored. And while the crowd watched in silence, one trained officer made a call that would almost cost 2 lives. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The dog wasn't warning them of danger. She was trying to save someone's life. What happened next unraveled every lie, every assumption, and turned the entire airport upside down. This isn't the story they thought they were writing. It's the one they never wanted told. If that stopped you mid-scroll, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done if you saw this go down? Stay with us. The truth is coming. At the far end, beside the final checkpoint before boarding, the K9 unit stood poised. Officer Lennox, holding the leash of a Belgian Malinois named Rook, whose frame was taut with focus. He had been still all morning, alert but silent, nose twitching now, and then at the scent of coffee, carry-ons, and stale perfume. That changed the moment Zariah Moss approached. Dressed in a slate-gray blazer and soft cotton maternity dress, she moved with practiced calm. Her passport and boarding pass were ready in hand. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, but she felt the shift in the atmosphere the instant her boots touched the rubber mat. Rook's ears twitched. His posture snapped forward. He let out a single sharp bark that cut through the checkpoint's hum. Zariah slowed, pausing out of instinct. The bark came again, louder this time, followed by a low growl that made passengers nearby turn their heads. Officer Lennox gripped the leash tighter, ordering Rook to heel. The dog didn't listen. Instead, he tugged forward, nose locked on Zariah's midsection, body trembling with urgency. The murmurs started almost immediately. A man in a hoodie glanced up from his phone. A couple holding iced lattes exchanged looks. Zariah froze. Not in fear, but in realization. She'd been here before, seen how fast perception twisted into suspicion. Before she could speak, a voice barked out from across the room. "Step aside." Now, Lieutenant Braxton Hurst approached fast, boots clapping heavy against aisle. Mid-40s, buzz cut, jaw tight. Badge shining under his pressed Navy uniform. He didn't ask for her name, didn't offer an explanation. He looked at her, then at Rook, then back to her like the verdict had already been written. "You, over here." Zariah's voice was steady. "Is there a problem?" Braxton didn't break stride. "When the dog reacts, we follow up. That's protocol." She raised an eyebrow. "The dog barked. And growled," he added, standing inches away now. "That's enough for probable cause." Officer Lennox, still restraining Rook, spoke up, quieter. "Sir, the dog's not alerting like you would for, I said protocol." Braxton snapped, cutting him off. "Escort her to secondary screening." Zariah blinked. "You didn't ask to see my ID." Braxton extended a hand, slow and performative. "Fine, let's see it." She handed over her passport and boarding pass without flinching. He scanned them with exaggerated care, eyes narrowing as he read her name. Zariah Moss. He paused on the photo. "Where you headed, Miss Moss?" "Chicago. Business class. Gate D12. Traveling alone?" "Yes." "Any check bags?" "One." "Carried what?" "Clothes. Laptop. Prenatal vitamins." Braxton's gaze snapped to her stomach. His jaw ticked. "You're pregnant." 7 months, she said evenly. "Do you need a note from my OB2? He didn't answer, just waved a hand toward the side hall. "Move her." Zariah turned to Officer Lennox, who avoided her eyes as he followed the order. Rook was still pulling at the leash, his nose twitching like he was trying to warn someone of something no one else understood. The watching crowd didn't say a word. A few passengers shook their heads and looked away. Others pulled out phones, not quite bold enough to record. Zariah didn't argue. She walked beside Lennox, posture upright, hand steady. But her heart was racing. Behind her, Lieutenant Braxton Hurst followed with calculated confidence, his boots clicking with that self-important cadence of a man who never expected to be questioned. Officer Keeley trailed a few steps back, younger, fresher-faced, still learning when to speak and when to stay invisible, but already feeling the sour twinge of discomfort in her gut. Inside the screening room, Zariah was told to stand near the metal table, a standard rectangular slab under harsh lighting. Braxton held up her ID again, tilting it under the light like he was inspecting a fake 20. "This real?" he asked, loud enough for it to sting. Zariah didn't flinch. "You're holding it. Scan it if you're unsure." Braxton chuckled dryly, tossing a glance toward Keeley. "Looks like it came from a Kinko's." Keeley shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Zariah met Braxton's eyes, her tone steady. "Racial profiling isn't standard procedure, Lieutenant. Neither is evading a K-9 alert," he countered. "But here we are." Zariah crossed her arms gently under her stomach. "I didn't evade anything. Your dog barked. That's not a narcotics signal." "Oh, so now you're a dog handler?" Braxton scoffed. "Must have been an elective with that attitude." Officer Keeley took a small step forward, her voice tentative. "Sir, if I may, Rook's alert behavior wasn't consistent with a narcotics or explosive trigger. He was agitated, not aggressive. Almost like a medical." Braxton's glare cut her off mid-sentence. "Are you the lead here, Keeley?" "No, sir," she said quickly, eyes down. "Then let's stick to observation, not interpretation." Rook's muffled bark echoed from the hallway, followed by a frustrated yelp. Zariah tilted her head slightly. "Your dog's trying to tell you something. Maybe someone in this room should listen." Braxton smirked. "We'll listen when we're done ruling out threats. Until then, you're the one in question, not him." He gestured to the bag on the table. "Open it." Zariah obliged, unzipping the small shoulder bag she'd carried through the terminal. Inside were only the essentials: a water bottle, a wallet, a small cosmetics pouch, prenatal vitamins, and a folded letter from her physician confirming her fitness to fly. Braxton pulled out the bottle of vitamins and turned it over. "Supplements? Mind if we test these for content?" "They're prescribed," Zariah replied. "You can scan the barcode." "Prescription doesn't mean legal," he muttered, slipping the bottle into a plastic tray. Keeley cleared her throat. "Sir, may I request we document the item transfer for chain of custody?" Braxton ignored her. He picked up the folded note next, reading the letterhead aloud. "Dr. Tessa Barlow, MD, OB-GYN. Date of issue 2 weeks ago." He sneered. "How convenient." "Pregnancy isn't convenient," Zariah said, voice low, sharp. "It's a reality, one your department clearly wasn't trained to deal with." Braxton slammed the letter back down. "We'll see what our scan says before we make assumptions." "No," Zariah corrected. "You already made your assumptions. Now you're scrambling for justification." Keeley glanced again toward the hallway. Rook was still barking intermittently, now pacing in tight, anxious circles. Something Keeley had only seen once before, during a training drill on detecting low blood sugar collapse in a diabetic passenger. Her fingers twitched at her side. Every protocol said to report a dog's shift in alert behavior, even if the commanding officer didn't ask. But speaking up now would paint a target on her back. Braxton moved toward the computer terminal, pulling up her name. "You know, Zariah," he said slowly, "there's something funny about your travel history." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, multiple flights up and down the East Coast. Mostly business class. No partner listed. No emergency contact. Either you're very independent or very good at hiding things." "Maybe I'm just very good at living in a world that expects me to justify existing," she answered. Braxton narrowed his eyes. "You got an answer for everything, don't you?" "No," she said. "Just the ones that matter." Rook barked again. Louder. Closer. Zariah felt something stir inside, an uncomfortable twinge beneath her ribs, not pain exactly, but pressure. She reached gently for the edge of the table to steady herself. Keeley's eyes snapped toward her, catching the slight wince. She spoke up, firmer this time. "Sir, I think we need medical to evaluate." "She's standing just fine," Braxton snapped. "We don't. She's 7 months pregnant. her pupils are dilated, and the dog's behavior is medical flag consistent. Keely took a breath. This matches the response Rook showed in that hypoxia drill at McConnell Base. Braxton's expression tightened. "You're not military anymore, officer. Let me handle this." Keely didn't back down. "If you delay medical evaluation and this becomes a liability case, you'll be the reason it ends up on every news outlet in the country." For a beat, no one moved. Zariah's grip tightened on the edge of the table. Her breathing slowed. Not labored, yet. But her expression had changed. Officer Keely's words still hung in the air, sharp and uncomfortably true. Lieutenant Braxton Hurst stood frozen for a beat too long, his jaw tight, his eyes not on Zariah, but on the growing noise beyond the door. Rook's whines and low, unsettled howls breaking the sterile quiet like cracks in glass. With reluctant stiffness, Braxton motioned to the tray of contents on the table. "Let's finish the bag," he muttered, as if ignoring the barking would force it out of reality. Zariah, now paler than before, leaned slightly against the table, but said nothing. She watched every motion, calculating, aware. Keely, unable to ignore her instincts or Rook's behavior any longer, stepped in and carefully removed a second pouch tucked deep in Zariah's bag. Inside was a single amber pill bottle, unlabeled, no pharmacy markings, just a twist cap sealed with a faded strip of medical tape. Braxton's eyes narrowed. "What's this?" "Prenatal," Zariah said softly, her tone tired. "The others made me sick. My midwife gave me a compounded blend." "Where's the prescription label?" he snapped. "She writes her doses by hand. It's not illegal." "It's unverified," he barked, turning the bottle over in his gloved hand like it was a grenade. Keely leaned closer. "Smells like folate and iron. Common in prenatal mixes." Braxton ignored her. This could be anything. Stimulants, opioids, sedatives. Who brings mystery pills through a checkpoint? "Someone who's pregnant and tired of vomiting from commercial brands," Zariah replied. Her words clipped, the burn of anger finally breaching the surface of her restraint. "Test it," Braxton said, tossing the bottle into a fresh plastic pouch. Keely bagged it without protest, but her face told another story. She'd seen this before, authority reaching for control when logic began to unravel. Rook's barking sharpened into a brief, painful howl, followed by sudden silence. A half-second later, the door cracked open without permission. Officer Lennox stood there, his hand tight on the leash, his eyes wide. "Sir," he said, his voice barely audible, "you should come out here." Braxton's face flushed. "Not now." "Sir, Rook stopped barking," Lennox said, but not because he calmed down. That sentence made all three heads turn. Zariah's grip on the table trembled slightly. Braxton turned back to her, deflecting. "We're not done here." He reached for the laptop bag she had placed at the end of the table earlier, unzipping the side compartment. A charger, a set of documents, and a sealed plastic folder slid halfway out. Keely caught a glance at the document. Ultrasound reports. Confirmed gestational age, 28 weeks. The date printed was recent. "She's telling the truth," Keely said flatly. Braxton didn't look up. "She's hiding something." At that moment, Rook let out a single long, low whimper, so guttural and strained it sounded less like an alert and more like a cry. Lennox stepped further into the doorway. He backed away from the wall. "He's trembling. I've never seen him do that." "So he's faulty now," Braxton snapped. "Dogs glitch sometimes, too." Keely stepped around the table. "No," she said. "They don't. Not dogs like him. He's not backing away from fear. He's reacting to distress." Zariah clutched her side, subtle but noticeable. Her lips parted, breath hitching slightly. Keely moved closer. "Zariah, are you in pain?" "It's tight," Zariah whispered. "Not sharp. Just pressure. Heavy." Braxton raised a hand. "That could be psychological." "So could your bias," Keely muttered, then spoke louder. "Lieutenant, Rook's reaction isn't threat-based. He's displaying classic avoidance, turning away from someone in suffering, not danger." Braxton looked at her like she'd cursed his ancestors. "He's trained for contraband. He's also trained for biological cues," Keely said. "His signal is shifting. This isn't criminal. It's clinical." Braxton's hands balled into fists. You think I can't tell the difference between a suspect and a sob story? I think, Keely said carefully, you're refusing to see what's in front of you. Rook let out another soft whimper from the hallway. Not a warning, not fear. A sound like mourning. Zariah reached for the chair near the corner, but swayed slightly before her fingers could find it. Keely was at her side in seconds, steadying her. She needs medical now, Keely said firmly. Not a pat down. Braxton hesitated, eyes darting between Zariah's face and the bottle of supplements. His pride was a powder keg. I'll call it in, he finally muttered. As he stepped toward the comm panel by the door, Keely caught the briefest flicker in Zariah's eyes. Pain now real and creeping. This was no performance. Braxton, mid-sentence at the comm panel, turned just in time to see her collapse into the nearby chair, her hands instinctively clutching her stomach. A sharp intake of breath escaped her lips, not a scream, but something quieter, more terrifying. Something's wrong, Zariah whispered, her eyes wide with confusion, her voice thinner than before. Keely knelt beside her immediately, her training kicking in. Can you describe the pain? Lower sharp then tight, Zariah managed, her breathing uneven now, like everything's being squeezed. Outside the room, Rook let out a frantic bark, followed by repeated thumps, his paws scratching at the door, nails scraping the metal in a desperate rhythm. Braxton hesitated, caught between the radio and the woman in distress before him. Is it labor? He asked, but the question lacked sincerity. It sounded more like accusation than concern. Keely didn't look up. It's too early for labor, she said, 7 months. This could be preterm contractions or worse. Like what? He said flatly. Placental abruption, uterine rupture, maybe fetal distress, Keely shot back, now pressing 2 fingers gently against Zariah's wrist. Her pulse is elevated. Skin's going clammy. Zariah groaned, this time louder, her head tilting back as another wave of discomfort hit her. Her fingertips pressed hard against the arms of the chair, knuckles blanching with tension. Outside, Rook's barking turned to a high-pitched whine, almost a cry. The door rattled slightly from his persistent pawing. Lennox, standing just outside, looked to Braxton through the narrow glass window, clearly unsure whether to enter or intervene. Braxton gestured him back, jaw clenched, unsure of his own next move. We need to get her horizontal, Keely said, rising just enough to clear the floor space and guiding Zariah gently forward. Lay her flat, elevate the legs. I need her off that chair. And do what? Play R. Braxton snapped. Until EMS arrives, we stabilize her, Keely said. Unless you want this woman and her baby to die in a TSA holding room. Zariah whimpered again, and this time, the sound broke something in the room. Not loud, but raw. It was the sound of a body losing control, of someone strong enough to endure pain finally realizing they might not outrun it. Keely eased her onto the floor, guiding her onto her side, using her own folded jacket as a cushion. Stay with me, Zariah. Deep breaths in, slow release. Like waves. You've done this before. This wasn't supposed to happen yet, Zariah gasped. I had time. Her eyes shimmered now, not just with fear, but with a sudden knowing that this was spiraling beyond her hands. Braxton hovered uselessly, eyes darting between the comm panel and the door. Rook's scratches were growing more violent, almost rhythmic, as if syncing with the urgency inside the room. Why is the damn dog going crazy? Braxton muttered. Keely didn't respond. She was busy counting Zariah's breaths, watching her chest rise too fast, too shallow. She's hyperventilating. We need oxygen. We don't have oxygen, Braxton snapped. We're a checkpoint, not a damn hospital. Then we improvise, Keely said. She grabbed a travel-sized water bottle from the evidence tray, cracked the seal, and drizzled some on Zariah's lips. Sip this. Slowly, Zariah tried, but her jaw trembled too hard to swallow. Keely leaned closer. Zariah, look at me. Focus on my voice, not the pain. It's burning, Zariah whispered, deep and low. Keely's stomach dropped. That wasn't a cramp. That wasn't a contraction. That was something tearing. She turned to Braxton. Call the EMS again. Tell them to run, not walk. Braxton stared at her, finally shaken. I think if we don't act in the next 5 minutes, we lose 2 lives, Keely said. And your badge won't mean anything when that lawsuit hits. Rook barked once more, a guttural, grief-soaked yowl, and then went silent. Zariah's breathing turned ragged. I don't want to die here, she whispered, tears slipping down the side of her face. Not like this. Not because someone didn't believe me. Keely gritted her teeth, voice low but firm. You're not dying. Not on my watch. She turned to Braxton. Open that door. Let Rook in. Now. Braxton hesitated, but Keely didn't wait. She moved to the door, yanked it open. Rook surged in, not with aggression, but urgency. He trotted straight to Zariah's side and laid down, pressing his head gently against her hip. His ears flattened, and he let out a low whimper like he was trying to soothe her with silence. He knows, Keely said softly. He's been trying to tell us all along. Zariah looked down at the dog beside her, her face slack with fatigue, but eyes still burning. He's not scared, she said weakly. He's grieving. Keely nodded. He feels the pain before we can name it. Outside, the siren of incoming paramedics began to echo through the terminal, still faint but approaching. She's losing consciousness. Pulse was elevated, shallow breathing, sudden collapse. One of the paramedics, a dark-haired woman named Torres, dropped to her knees beside Zariah and immediately checked her pulse while her partner prepped the oxygen mask. BP's dropping, Torres muttered, already reaching for the portable monitor. She's diaphoretic, pupils reactive but sluggish. Rook remained where he was, unmoving, his eyes locked on Zariah's face as if refusing to leave her side until someone else proved they could do better. Braxton stood by the wall, silent now, one hand clamped tightly on his radio, but offering no commands. It was too late for authority. Now it was Triov. Keely stayed close, assisting where she could, handing over the bottle of unlabeled vitamins. She said these were prescribed by her midwife, she added. No formal label, but consistent with prenatal blends. Torres didn't look up, not the priority. She pressed her stethoscope against Zariah's belly, pausing for several seconds. Then she leaned into her partner, her voice tight. I'm not picking up consistent fetal heart tones. What's it reading? Dipping into the 90s. Sometimes lower. Zariah stirred slightly under the mask, her face contorted in pain. Her hands twitched against the floor, searching for something. Keely moved forward and gripped one gently. I'm here, she whispered. Stay with us. Zariah's eyes fluttered open, barely. Her lips parted beneath the oxygen mask. Her voice came out faint, as fragile as tissue in the wind. The baby isn't mine. Keely blinked, not sure she'd heard right. What? Zariah's eyes rolled slightly, then found their focus again, direct, pointed, urgent. I'm a surrogate, she whispered. She's not mine, but I promised I'd get her home. The room fell quiet. Even Torres froze for a split second before barking out the next instruction. We're moving her now. Call the hospital. Tell them we're coming in hot. We've got a gestational surrogate with potential uterine rupture and fetal bradycardia. Her partner grabbed the gurney and unlatched the legs. Braxton's voice broke through the tension, uncertain and low. She's carrying someone else's baby? Yes, Keely said, her voice laced with disbelief, admiration, and the weight of all the assumptions that had just shattered. And she didn't stop when the pain started. She didn't tell anyone. She just kept walking because she didn't want to make a scene. Zariah's hand tightened weakly around Keely's. Her lips moved again under the mask. Keely leaned close. What is it? Zariah's voice was a ghost. Tell her. I didn't break my promise. Keely squeezed her hand. You didn't. You won't. Torres and her partner lifted Zariah gently onto the gurney. Rook stood when they did, stepping aside only when Torres waved him off with a slow, respectful gesture. You did good, boy, she said under her breath. Real good. As they rolled Zariah toward the exit, Braxton stepped aside, his face ashen. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. Lennox opened the door wide as the gurney passed, and Rook followed behind at a calm, steady pace, as if escorting her to where she needed to go next. Keely stayed behind for a second, her eyes scanning the screening room, the spilled evidence bag, the bottle of water, half used, the pill pouch still on the tray. All of it now pointless. All of it the wrong focus. She turned to Braxton, her voice low but clear. "You almost buried her under your assumptions." Braxton looked away, shame beginning to settle into the creases of his jaw. "I thought the dog was the only one who got it right," she snapped. "And you silenced him, same way you tried to silence her." Braxton said nothing. The sound of the stretcher wheels faded into the hallway. Keely took a breath and followed, her steps fast but heavy. Keely sat near Zariah's head, steadying the oxygen mask as the lead paramedic worked the vitals monitor and radioed the hospital. Zariah's eyes had closed again, her face pale and glistening, her pulse erratic. "We're losing fetal heart rate," the paramedic said, sweat beading at his temple. 90, 82, 78. "We're not holding." The driver's voice crackled through the front speaker. "ETA 7 minutes to County ER." Keely's heart dropped. "That's too long." The paramedic nodded grimly. "We need a surgeon ready the moment we hit the dock." He turned toward the radio, switching channels. "This is Unit 49 inbound to County. Female, 28 weeks, gestational surrogate. Suspected uterine rupture, fetal bradycardia. Requesting or prepped on arrival. Patient needs to be cut in 6 minutes or less." The line crackled back. "Copy that. Trauma 1 is prepping. Alerting OB and NICU now." Zariah stirred faintly, her head shifting. Keely leaned close, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "You're not done yet," she whispered. "Stay here. Stay with us." Zariah's lips moved, but no sound came. Her fingers twitched, then stilled. Her vitals monitor beeped faster now, irregular, spiking and dipping like a signal fighting static. At her feet, Rook lay curled on the ambulance floor, his head resting flat against the side of the stretcher. But he wasn't calm. His body vibrated with tension, his ears twitching at every sudden movement, his breathing shallow. Every few seconds, he let out a soft, uncertain whine, like he could feel the clock running out. Keely noticed it too. "He knows," she muttered, watching the dog. "He's not reacting to her scent. He's tracking something else." The paramedic glanced over. "He's trained for bombs. Trained for survival," Keely answered. "He's not warning of danger. He's feeling distress." Rook suddenly sat up, ears alert, staring directly at Zariah's abdomen. Not in panic, but like he was trying to understand something deeper. Keely caught her breath. "You're sensing something," she whispered. "But what?" The ambulance hit a hard corner and the stretcher jolted. Zariah's monitor shrieked briefly, heart rate dropping. The paramedic swore under his breath. 65. "We're in the red." Keely grabbed the 4 line, steadying it as the fluids ran faster. Rook let out a single, sharp bark. Keely flinched. "Talk to me," she said, not to the paramedic, but to the dog. "What are you picking up?" Rook barked again, then pawed the stretcher twice, directly at the lower left side of Zariah's stomach. The paramedic blinked. "That's oddly specific." Keely's thoughts raced. If he's pointing at a single quadrant, there could be localized trauma. Maybe the placenta's detached. Or worse, the medic said, grabbing the ultrasound probe. "We have 2 minutes for a red." He pressed the sensor against her skin, eyes flicking between shadowy movements on the screen. "There," he breathed. "Massive internal bleeding. Uterine linings compromised. The baby's heart is fluttering. We're out of time." "Call it," Keely said. "Get them ready to cut the second we stop." The ambulance screamed into the ER dock as 3 doctors and a trauma team rushed out to meet them. Keely jumped out first, briefing them mid-stride. Surrogate, 28 weeks, probable uterine rupture with fetal distress, 6-minute threshold. Her vitals are crashing. One of the ER doctors, a tall woman in a blue surgical cap, nodded and shouted back into the building. "Prep or 2. Neonatal rhesus on standby. Trauma team, Alpha." As they rolled Zariah inside, Rook tried to follow, but a hospital staffer stepped forward to block him. "He can't go in." "Yes, he can," Keely snapped. "He's part of this team. He stays close." The doctor hesitated, then waved them through. "Fine, but keep him back once they gown up." In the hallway, They reached the final prep doors. A nurse moved to strip Zariah of her civilian clothing. Keely stepped aside, breathless. Rook sat just behind her, eyes locked on the table. "She said it wasn't her child," Keely whispered. The lead doctor turned. "What?" "She's a surrogate," Keely repeated. "She was just trying to deliver a promise." The doctor nodded slowly. "Then let's help her keep it." The doors swung shut. Keely remained outside, frozen. Rook sat beside her like a statue, unmoving, staring through steel like he could still see inside. Keely reached down, her fingers brushing the dog's fur. "She's got 6 minutes," she murmured. "So do we." Inside, Zariah was being prepped for emergency surgery, her vitals dancing dangerously close to zero. Rook remained planted at the threshold, unblinking, ears twitching slightly every time the heart monitor peaked or dipped from beyond the walls. He hadn't barked again, hadn't whined, hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His silence now carried weight heavier than sound. A resident doctor emerged moments later, clipboard in hand, his face pinched with stress. Keely intercepted him before he could pass. "What's her status?" The doctor glanced at his notes, hesitant. "BP's unstable. They've started the incision. Placenta had partially separated. There was significant bleeding behind the uterus. We're looking at a complex rupture, likely made worse by previous scarring. But there's something else." He hesitated. Keely narrowed her eyes. "What?" "Her tissue layers. They aren't reacting to the instruments like we'd expect. There's degradation inconsistent with standard trauma. It looks almost synthetic in nature." "Synthetic?" she repeated. "How?" "We don't know yet," the doctor said. But the lead surgeon requested a toxicology consult. And radiology just pulled her archive travel history. "You said she was a surrogate." "Yes. She told me the child wasn't biologically hers." The doctor checked the clipboard again. "Well, according to the intake note, she listed her next of kin as a woman named Dr. Kalia Renew. She's flagged as a bioethics researcher at a facility in Quebec. International Reproductive Research Program. That's not standard." Keely felt something cold slide down her spine. "So she's not just a surrogate, she's experimental." "Looks that way," the doctor confirmed. "The baby is stable so far. They've started neonatal extraction, but the mother's tissue response is complicated. It may be reacting against the graft." Keely glanced down at Rook. That's what he was sensing. The doctor frowned. The dog. He was tracking her deterioration. Not in fear, in grief. The doors behind them opened slightly, revealing a nurse in full surgical gear, her voice low and urgent. "We've got the baby. Female, 2.1 pounds. Intubated. NICU en route." Keely exhaled, just once, tension escaping her lungs in a single burst. "And Zariah?" The nurse didn't answer right away. She coded for 12 seconds, but she's back. It's not over yet. As the nurse turned and vanished again, Keely slowly sat down against the corridor wall, her legs giving in. Rook stepped beside her, lowered his head gently onto her knee. She rested her hand on his back. "This wasn't just about instinct," she whispered. "You knew. You felt everything long before the machines did." A buzz came through the hospital intercom, followed by a page overhead. Keely barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the swinging doors, her thoughts replaying every second since Zariah walked through security. Every prejudice, every delay, every breath wasted on doubt. And all the while, the dog had tried to speak, and none of them had listened, at least not soon enough. A soft voice spoke beside her. She turned to find an older woman approaching, early 60s, French accent, wearing a lanyard marked Renew Institute. "I'm looking for Zariah Moss," the woman said. Keely stood immediately. "Dr. Renew?" "Yes. She listed you as next of kin." "She would," the doctor nodded. "She's under our long-term clinical program. She volunteered for an accelerated gestational host trial last year. Synthetic matrix implantation paired with a gene-coded embryo. She knew the risks. The child, genetically derived from the intended parents. One of them is terminal. The embryo carries a stem-modified immunity sequence that could be used for postnatal cellular transfer. if it survives. She said she promised to get the baby home, Keely said softly. She never told anyone what she'd done. She didn't want to be thanked, Renu replied. She just wanted to finish what she started. At that moment, the surgical doors opened again. A nurse emerged with her scrub stained, face tired but smiling. She's stable. Critical but stable. And the baby, she's breathing. Keely felt her knees weaken again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was release. Thank God, she whispered. Rook let out a soft huff, his body finally relaxing, his chest rising and falling in time with the steady beeping from the monitor inside the oar. The race against time was over, for now. What mattered now was time, and Zariah had none left. The faint echo of distant beeping from the oar intensified the ache in her chest. She could almost feel Zariah's pain pulsing through the walls, her body still holding on to something she wasn't ready to release. And then the door swung open, and a nurse emerged, her face a mixture of exhaustion and something Keely couldn't quite place. We need you, the nurse said, catching Keely's attention. She didn't wait for a response, only turned back to the operating room doors, holding them open. Keely's heart pounded in her chest as she followed, each step heavier than the last. The sight inside the oar stopped her in her tracks. The team was moving fast, their hands flying over instruments, the steady rhythm of their work synchronized with the emergency situation. Zariah was unconscious, pale, and completely still on the table. The bright overhead lights cast an almost surgical white glow over her body as they prepped her for the final incision. The baby was still attached to the placenta, but her heart rate was dropping by the second. The lead surgeon, a tall woman with graying hair tied back, motioned for Keely to step closer. We have less than 2 minutes, she said without looking up. If we don't proceed now, both will be lost. Keely swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Do we have a plan? The surgeon nodded grimly. We're extracting the fetus, but Zariah's internal structure is collapsing. The synthetic tissue is rejecting the pregnancy at an accelerated rate. We need to perform an emergency incision to stabilize her before we can focus on the neonatal transfer. Keely looked down at the operating table, her gaze briefly flicking to Rook, who had quietly entered the room, sitting near Zariah's head, his eyes locked on her. The dog had been eerily calm through all of this. It wasn't like the other times when he'd reacted out of defense or alert. This time he simply waited, his eyes full of focus, his body still, almost as if he understood something none of them did. And the baby? Keely asked. We have a better chance with her if we don't delay, the surgeon answered, her voice tight. We're stabilizing both as we go, but it's a race. Keely took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. Then do it. The surgeon gave a brief nod, and the room came alive with a series of swift, calculated movements. The moment the incision began, a heavy weight settled over Keely. She could feel Rook's presence near her, the soft, almost imperceptible sound of his breath. There was no barking, no anxiety, just a quiet, unspoken understanding of the gravity of the moment. Keely knew that Rook had been there when everything had gone wrong. And now he was still there, silent, watchful, as Zariah's life hung in the balance. The operating team worked quickly, moving with an urgency that bordered on desperation. Keely remained by the table, eyes locked on the surgeon's hands, as they delicately navigated the layers of Zariah's abdomen. Each moment felt like an eternity, the seconds stretching impossibly long. Then, the surgeon's voice cut through the tension. We're through. Zariah's body jerked slightly at the first incision, but her heart rate didn't dip further. The baby's heart rate, however, remained erratic, still weak, still fragile. But then came the soft, hesitant cry. Keely's breath caught in her throat as the small, squirming form was lifted from Zariah's body, swaddled quickly, and passed to a waiting NICU nurse. A moment later, the doctor looked up, eyes flickering between the fetal monitor and Zariah. She's in the clear, the surgeon said. But we need to stabilize her quickly. We're losing her in here. Keely's heart skipped. We're losing her? The surgeon nodded, her voice barely a whisper. She's not responding to the repair. I'm afraid we need to transfer her immediately. The room fell into an almost deafening silence. Zariah's body was still, her breath faint but steady, while the tiny infant, the reason they had all rushed here, was being whisked away to the NICU. Keely's mind raced as she watched the small figure being carried into the hallway. Behind her, Rook stood, his head held high, now calm, but his eyes still on Zariah. Then the door opened, and a man in military fatigues rushed into the room. His face was etched with worry, his hands gripping the sides of the doorframe as his gaze locked on Zariah's still body. He was joined by a woman, her face drawn, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she had been holding her breath for too long. The man's voice cracked slightly as he stepped forward. "Is she?" He stopped, unable to finish the question. Keely nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "She's alive. We're working on stabilizing her." "She's our daughter's," the woman said, her voice breaking. "We've been waiting for this moment for so long." "Your daughter?" Keely repeated, confused. The man stepped forward, taking his wife's hand. "Yes, she's ours. We couldn't have children ourselves. Zariah. She's been carrying her for us. He paused, clearly struggling with emotion. "We're just so grateful. Thank you for keeping her alive." Keely stood still for a moment, her mind reeling as the pieces fell into place. Zariah hadn't just been a surrogate. She had been their last hope, no matter the cost. The baby was their future. And now Zariah was the one paying the price for their miracle. The low hum of machines beyond that threshold, the beeping, the soft shuffle of nurses' steps, remained the only confirmation that Zariah was still alive. Across from her sat the couple, the intended parents, their fingers interlocked, their eyes raw from tears. The mother, May, held a small pink baby cap in her hands, rolling the hem between her thumbs like it was the last thread holding her together. Her husband, Captain Elijah Park, stared straight ahead, his posture military straight, but his jaw clenched in silent prayer. No one spoke, not until the soft creak of the ICU doors drew every eye in the room toward the figure stepping out, Dr. Renew. She removed her mask and surgical cap, her face pale and exhausted, but her expression steady. "She's stable," the doctor said. "Zariah is alive." Keely exhaled, closing her eyes briefly, her chest loosening for the first time in what felt like days. Elijah stood quickly. "Can we see her?" "She's unconscious," Dr. Renew replied gently. "But yes, soon. We're monitoring her closely. The bleeding has stopped, and we've completed the reconstruction." But her voice faltered. There was too much damage to the reproductive lining. The matrix failed. We had no choice but to remove the uterus. May covered her mouth, eyes filling again. Elijah dropped into the chair. Behind him, like the weight of the news, shattered his balance. Keely looked away, her jaw tightening. Zariah had given everything. Not just the pregnancy, not just the risk. She had traded the future she might have chosen for herself so that a stranger could hold their own. "Does she know?" Keely asked. Dr. Renew shook her head. "Not yet. When she wakes, she'll be groggy, confused. But she'll understand." Rook lay at Keely's feet, his body finally at rest, but his eyes remained open, still watching the hallway like a sentry who refused to let his guard down until the final moment passed. A few minutes later, a nurse approached quietly with a clipboard. "There's someone else here asking about the infant." "Who?" Keely asked. "He says he's with Homeland Security. Name's Silas Boone." Keely frowned. "I know him. He's the K-9 lead who trained Rook." "Should I send him in?" the nurse asked. Keely nodded. "Yeah, let him through." Moments later, Silas stepped into the waiting area, his uniform dark, his expression unreadable beneath a day's worth of stubble and exhaustion. He approached slowly, his gaze shifting between Keely, the couple, and finally, the small window that led to the neonatal unit. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said quietly. Keely stood. "You trained the dog that saved her life. You should be here." Silas gave a nod, then glanced toward Rook, who perked up at the sound of his voice. "Hey girl," he murmured, crouching beside the Malinois. She let out a soft sound in response, and he stroked her fur gently. "You did good." Then his eyes lifted back toward the window where the infant slept in a plastic bassinet under a warming lamp, her tiny body cocooned in wires and monitors. He stared for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, he turned to Keely. "They ran the gene ID. For the baby?" "Yeah," Silas nodded. "Standard postnatal registry scan. It's part of the embryo tracking program." Keely narrowed her eyes. "And?" Silas took a breath. "The maternal donor was flagged under a now-defunct Department of Defense biobank trial 8 years ago." He paused. "My wife was a donor." Keely blinked. "Wait, you're saying that baby," Silas said, his voice shaking, "is biologically mine?" Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Keely's heart thudded once, then twice, then stopped entirely for a beat. "I thought her samples were destroyed," Silas added, his voice distant. "After the crash. After they told me everything was unrecoverable. I never knew they transferred the embryos to civilian biotech." Keely stared at the infant. "So, Zariah wasn't just carrying someone else's child. She was carrying yours." Silas nodded slowly, his eyes glassy now. "She didn't know. I didn't know. But somehow, that dog," he looked down at Rook. "She knew something no one else did." In the silence that followed, Rook shifted her weight, resting her head against Silas's boot like she'd been waiting for that truth to come full circle. May, still seated, wiped her eyes and looked toward Silas, her voice trembling. "What does this mean?" Silas turned to her, his face softening. "It means your daughter has a complicated story, but one that saved more than one life." Elijah nodded slowly, accepting the weight of it. Keely looked between them all. The woman who had almost died, the child born of sacrifice, the couple finally holding their dream, and the man who had unknowingly lost a daughter, only to find her again. In that hallway, in that hour, time stood still, not in fear, but in awe, not of science. The air outside the hospital 3 days later felt different, not lighter, not quite easier, but charged with something unspoken, like the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed, but the damage still lingers. Keely stood at the curb, arms folded against the early morning chill, watching as Rook sat beside her, calm and poised, her eyes focused on the doors of the hospital entrance, like she still expected someone to walk through them in pain. But today was different. Today was the day they all walked out alive. Zariah had been discharged 30 minutes ago, weak but standing, a wheelchair offered and refused with the same quiet strength she had carried through the entire ordeal. Her hospital gown had been traded for jeans, a sweatshirt, and a scarf wrapped loosely around her hair. The color had returned to her face, though the hollowness in her eyes lingered, a kind of weight that stays with a person when they've come too close to the edge and come back not whole, but changed. Silas stood a few feet away with Captain Park and May, who now held the newborn against her chest, wrapped in soft pink cotton. The baby had been cleared for transfer to a specialized neonatal recovery center, and the Parks had agreed to fly back with her that night. But not before saying goodbye. Zariah stepped forward slowly, every movement deliberate, not because of pain, but because of gravity. She stopped in front of May and Elijah, her gaze falling on the infant now asleep in May's arms. "She's beautiful," Zariah said, voice low. "You should call her something that means strength." May's eyes filled with tears. "We're naming her Sarah." "Why Sarah?" Zariah asked softly. "Short for Seraphina," May replied. "The angel who walks through fire." Zariah blinked, then nodded once, as if the name was enough. Then she turned to Keely and knelt beside Rook, who sat up just slightly, tail brushing against the pavement. "You never left me," Zariah whispered, her hand resting gently on the dog's side. "You knew the truth before anyone else. And you didn't care about my skin, or how scared I looked, or what badge tried to silence you. You just knew I was breaking." Rook let out a small sound, something between a sigh and a whine, and leaned forward, pressing her head into Zariah's chest. Keely smiled, but her eyes were glassy. "She doesn't alert like any K9 I've ever seen," she said. "She reacts to life, to loss. She doesn't respond to threat. She responds to danger of another kind." "She's not just a dog," Zariah murmured. "She's my angel, just one that doesn't wear a white coat." Behind them, the parking lot gate buzzed open as an official black sedan pulled in. Braxton stepped out, not in uniform this time, but in plain clothes. His expression stiff, jaw set, eyes hollow. He didn't approach right away. He stood near the curb, waiting. Killy saw him first. "He shouldn't be here," she muttered. Silas turned slowly. "Internal Affairs suspended him this morning. Formal investigations underway. He's being reviewed for misconduct, racial bias, and negligence, leading to life-threatening delay of care." "Good," Killy said, her voice flat. "He deserves more." Braxton finally stepped forward, his hands half raised, as if even he wasn't sure what he came to say. He looked at Zariah, but didn't meet her eyes. "I wanted to say," he trailed off, then forced the words. "I didn't know." "No," Zariah replied without anger, just certainty. "You didn't want to know." Braxton nodded slowly, then turned and left, his presence fading as quickly as it had arrived. No more power in his stride. No more shield in his badge. Just another man out of uniform, walking away from what he refused to see. Killy stepped forward with a small, folded piece of paper and handed it to Zariah. "From the hospital board. They're giving Rook an official commendation. First K-9 to trigger a non-combatant biological alert, ever." Zariah unfolded the note, then looked down at Rook, whose head tilted as if awaiting instructions. "She doesn't need a medal," Zariah whispered. "She just needs to know she was right." Silas stepped up beside them, his voice quiet. "She knows. She always did." The wind shifted, the sun breaking through a thin veil of gray above them. Rook stood slowly, her tail swaying as she turned toward the van that would take her and Keely back to the airport. Zariah watched her go, her hand resting on her own chest now, not from pain, but from something deeper. "You saved a life," she whispered into the breeze, "and in doing it, you reminded us who we are when we choose to see with instinct instead of fear." No applause, no ceremony, just a quiet departure, a soft goodbye, and a steady rhythm of breath returning to a world that nearly silenced it. Rook didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her job was done. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives that reveal the truth beneath the surface. What moment hit you the hardest? Was it when Rook refused to back down, or when Zariah whispered that the child wasn't hers? And where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts matter. Let's talk about it below.